Welcome once again to our next edition of our What the Fuckinars. Today we're going to be talking about site reliability engineering. Now, there's a few things that we need to get to first. The first one is housekeeping. This will only take a couple of minutes. The second one are the announcements. So the reason we started these webinars back last year was to try to create a bit of community spirit. Announcements, gossip, the type of corridor conversation that you might have at a conference. So the first 15 minutes is a bit chatty and a bit, a little bit of gossip, etc., etc. And that's what we're going to be doing in the announcements. And of course, in our section, what the fuck is the goss? Now, people sometimes ask me, what does goss mean? Well, that's short for gossip. So we have a little bit of industry gossip, and that's where my colleagues Ian and Adrian like to come in. And then finally, we'll meet Nathen and we'll find out what is SRE. Okay, in terms of housekeeping, the most important thing is this. We have a code of conduct. The short version is this: try to be respectful to each other. We do not tolerate racism, sexism, or prejudice based on people's political beliefs. Carla will post this now into the chat box. If you want to read the long form version, you can do so. Alternatively, if you need a code of conduct for your own events, please feel free to copy it and paste it and use it as you need. A couple of extra pieces of housekeeping today. It's a very, very busy webinar. So therefore, it's going to be difficult to field every questions. So I have roped in my colleague who runs our CRE team, Cameron Wood. Cameron, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. And I think, as you're alluding to, if anyone wants to chat with me using the chat tool during the talk, or maybe after the talk, if we have time, we might be able to field some questions there and help answer some questions you might have.
Awesome, Cameron. Yes, exactly. So because there are different levels in the audience today, if you've got specific technical questions, Cameron's going to tackle them. Just send him a message on the Zoom chat. Alternatively, he can follow up with you after the call today. And we've also got our other colleague, Greg. Hello, Greg.
Hey, Jamie. Hi, everybody. Really nice to be here. Also, please reach out to me in the chat. And it's really good to see in the chat people putting in where they're coming in from. So we've got people as far north as Norway and as far south as South Africa.
Yay!
So welcome, everyone. Yeah.
Greg is South African, the least salesy salesperson in the world. And we promised we would never turn these things into a sales event. But there's lots of people who come here today who are interested in our actual services. So Greg's there for you. Send him a direct message. All of the questions, put them in the chat box or send them to me or Carla, and we will make sure that we get them answered today or at a later point. Okay, now, we're about to do our first new feature. This is a Zoom, what is it, Carla? A Zoom poll. A poll, yes.
Correct. Yes.
Last year, we had a cool training session, and it was about service level objectives. It was 2 or 3 hours, brilliant turnout, and people really learned a lot. Now, we were not planning to run this again for another maybe few months, but the turnout for today's webinar has been so overwhelming, actually. There are hundreds of people on the call right now. We are going to run we're going to run this training taster again. It's completely free, and it's just part of our ongoing mission to educate our community or to work with the community. So if this is something that you're interested in, please vote in the poll. And of course, if you're not interested, vote, thumbs down. Alternatively, or additionally, follow the hyperlink that Carla will share in the chat and register your intention. We don't care if whole teams come to this. If you want to come along with a whole team, that's awesome. The more the merrier. If we get 20, 30, 40 participants, we're definitely going to run this. So there's a few people saying, hell yeah, okay, it's happening. You might as well stop voting. So this event is happening. Awesome. Good response. Good idea, Carla. Okay, good. The next What the Fuckinar, What the Fuck is internal developer platforms. This is with our friends from Humanitic. Get signed up now. And finally, Container Solutions is an awesome company to work at. Nathen might have some, he might try to convince you Google's an awesome place to work at, which of course it is. CS is an awesome place to work, psychologically safe, hilarious. It's a hilarious company to be in. we're really, really good at what we do, really good. And that's our tagline. Nice people, good at our jobs. If you want to jump on our careers page and come and join us, follow the link there and we'll help you get through that process. And that is it for the announcements. Thank you so much for your patience. And now this is when I get to breathe a sigh of relief and we get to catch up with industry gossip with our two resident, what was I going to say, housewives? No, that's not fair, is it? Not housewives. Our two resident gossip mongers, Ian Mile and Adrian Moa. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Gossip monger was exactly the phrase in my head, Jamie, when you were trying to reach for it. So clearly a meeting of minds there.
Yes. Ian, what have you got for us?
Well, it was actually a pretty light week for news, gossip type news. But the thing that caught my eye was the Amazon doorbell outage. So Amazon have this product called Ring, which is not just a doorbell. It does a load of other things too. But they had a major outage, which resulted in lots of people not having doorbells, having spent potentially up to $100 a year on a doorbell. So a bit of schadenfreude for all us IoT skeptics out there, but I'm pretty sure they'll take over the world eventually. And
Ian, can you tell us why? Is that because a whole Amazon region has gone down?
No one would tell them, but no one would tell the reporters, but they believe, well, it didn't seem to be related to any cloud outage as such. It was probably an outage related to the central Ring servers. So Amazon bought a company called Ring who delivered this product, and presumably they still have some sort of infrastructure that has a single point of failure. Which is unrelated to Google, to Amazon Cloud. So yeah, interesting story.
I was once at a conference, Ian, this will make you laugh. I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but I've started now, so I have to finish. And there was somebody giving a talk about devices and a new device so that you could be intimate with your partner over the internet. Right, so I let your imagination fill in the blanks there. And in the audience was an IoT security specialist who stuck his hand up and said, "Don't do that. Whatever you do, do not do that." Well, that was my story.
I'll take your word for it, Jamie. I'll take your word for it.
I tell you, it happened. It's a true story. Okay, Rust gets a foundation.
Yeah. So this is, I think, actually fairly big news. Maybe not like gossipy. But it was announced yesterday that there's going to be a Rust Foundation. So most of you are probably aware that Rust was largely developed by Mozilla for the past, decade or so. But now it's moved to a foundation, which is great because I think we all know Mozilla hit some troubles recently. And it has several founding companies, AWS, UI, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla. And I think those founding companies give you a good idea of kind of who's interested in Rust and kind of where it's going as well. So I thought that was really interesting. And they all pledged a financial commitment. I also want to just pull out a couple of quotes from the announcement blog, because I thought it was a very interesting announcement. And one thing they pointed to was Rust represents a new radical way to collaborate on open source projects. And what they're talking about here is the way that decisions are made in the Rust project. They've got a very strong way of sort of delegating and distributing decision making. So it's not all like just a central group of a few people that make all the decisions. They kind of want it to be, I don't know, what's the word? Much more, I was about to say socialist. That's probably not the right word. That's definitely not the right word. But you want to see it be a group thing as opposed to just controlled by a few. Yeah, they also spoke about the mission to be to support and prepare maintainers and create governance structures for a period of record-breaking growth and adoption. So big things in the future for Rust, I would say.
And Adrian, why is Rust so popular in the cloud native community?
I think it's popular across a range of communities. There was another piece of news this week, which was that HTTPD, which is one of the old sort of C web servers, is part of that is basically being rewritten to use Rust TLS methods. And it's all about safety, really. Like people are tired of buffer overflows and similar things in C. So I think a large part of it's memory safety for writing sort of critical applications.
And of course, you and your colleagues at Container Solutions write programs in Rust, one of our favorite languages, right?
Yeah, so we have the Trow project, which is a container registry, and that's written in Rust, yeah.
Exactly. So if you want to come and apply for a job here, no, just kidding. Move it along. Okay, well, I think that is it for today's gossip. I was really interested. It was nice to hear about Rust, but of course, that was real gossip about the doorbell failure from Amazon. You've got to feel a little bit sorry for our colleagues in the community when that happens. That's about it for the introductions. So thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Ian. We are now going to start to get into the talk. I've only one more thing to say. Many of you will recognize this. This is the Cloud Native Maturity Matrix. It was developed by the team here at Container Solutions. And of course, like all models, it's completely wrong, but it's a useful model. And in the last few months, when we've been talking at these webinars, we've been looking at different aspects, whether it's about delivery, build automation, provisioning, microservices, or whether it's been about culture, which is what Holly was talking about the last time we met. Well, of course, today is about SRE. And SRE is not just about the way we organize, but the practices and the principles in which we work. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And therefore, it's without any more hesitation, I'm going to ask you to do that thing we do. Unmute yourselves for just one moment whilst we give a very warm welcome to Nathen Harvey, who's going to be talking about what the fuck is SRE. Welcome, Nathen.
Thank you so much. Let's see. I'm going to take over sharing the screen here, Jamie, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, go for it.
Excellent. And then just to verify, you can see my slides. Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, let's jump right in. Holy shit. Look at those servers. They are on fire. All right. Fuck. Look, we've all been here before. Something important has just failed. Heck, something very important is likely failing right now. How did you find out about this failure? Maybe you got a phone call from PagerDuty. Maybe someone posted a complaint on Twitter. What's happening? Maybe your customers can't get to the site. Maybe they can't add items to their shopping cart. Maybe they can't check out. Or maybe something more subtle, like recommended products are not showing up. Advertisements aren't loading. Or the payment process, it's taking 35% longer than usual to complete for customers whose credit card starts with the number 4. So now what? How will we respond? Well, let's convene a group of experts to troubleshoot and resolve the issue. How long will it take us to get the right group of folks assembled? How long does the troubleshooting process last? And how many, when will it be fixed? Interruptions will the team receive? And from whom? When the issue is resolved and things are back to normal, what happens next? Well, clearly we should do something about this. Maybe we need to make sure that people understand it wasn't our fault. It wasn't my fault at all. It was probably the networking team. They're always to blame. Or maybe we just need to assess whose fault it was so that we can fire them or mete out some other sort of punitive consequences. Or maybe, just maybe, we're a bit more enlightened and we decide that now is a good time to learn from failure and to take some time to investigate the system to see what can we learn from this failure. Perhaps as part of the investigation, we can identify some countermeasures that we could implement to prevent a similar type of failure in the future. Let me guess. We will add more monitors and maybe update our runbook. Yeah, that'll do it. But what else could we learn from this incident? Can we dig deeper into the circumstances that brought us here and learn some more systemic lessons? Regardless of what we learn and what next steps or remediations we capture, just how does the organization respond? Do we actually prioritize that work that our investigation uncovered? Does that work? Does it end up on our backlog? Or does it exist only in that write-only RCA document that we all beautifully crafted and then tucked away, never to be looked at again. And if that work does end up in our backlog, who's responsible for ensuring that it gets prioritized and the work actually gets done? Oh boy, this talk sure is off to a bumpy start. Let's pause for a moment and take a breath. That's maybe we should have done something that we should have done when we first identified the issue. So, hi, I'm Nathan. I'm a developer advocate here at Google Cloud. I've had the opportunity to do a bunch of different things throughout my career in tech. I can proudly say that I've been responsible for some pretty epic system failures. And likewise, I'm rather ashamed to admit that some of the code I've written is still running in production servers somewhere. I suppose I'm lucky though. I'm no longer on call for that code. By the way, thanks for checking. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm really glad to be here today to talk about SRE with you, and would love to keep the conversation going beyond this what the fucking are. So please do reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Oh, and my father, he maintained an 85% SLA for correct letters in his children's names. So if you do follow me, make sure that you misspell my name the same way that he did. That way we can keep in touch. All right, SRE. Who is this talk for? Well, this talk is for people like me and you, because while SRE is a job, there are people called site reliability engineers. It's also a way of working, and importantly, it's a way of working together. And it's most successful when people from all across an organization are engaged. But before we get any further into what SRE is, let's look at the context in which it has emerged. Technology has changed a lot over the past couple of decades. We've moved from mainframes to monoliths to microservices. But our businesses have changed also. We've moved from this idea of we need to have the tech running during business hours. Maybe we can take it down during maintenance windows. But today, everything is always on. And our roles have changed. We've moved from system administrators. We've moved to network operations teams. And now SRE, site reliability engineering. So as the industry evolves, our understanding and our requirements around that R word, reliability, have really changed. We've gone from a place of being able to answer simple questions. Is it up or is it down? It's very difficult to actually answer that question. The question is very nuanced when it comes to the systems that we are responsible for running today. So site reliability engineering, or SRE, this is an approach to technical operations that originated at Google and has since grown into a global community of practitioners, of folks that care about SRE. We've got hundreds of them right here today in this What the Fucking Are. It is focused on intelligent decision-making in order to improve service reliability and ultimately to make users happier. SRE provides a framework for measurement that outlines practices for monitoring, for incident response, and for capacity planning. But I think the best way to explain SRE is that it is a language. SRE is a vocabulary. It's a vocabulary that helps developers. It helps operators, product owners, the business, everyone talk about the hard choices that we have to make. And the hardest choice that I know of is this one. Should we spend our time adding features, or should we spend our time hardening the systems, making them more reliable? When we try to answer that question, there can be a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different viewpoints, which is great. We'd love to have all of these different viewpoints, all of these different stakeholders as part of the conversation, because everyone has a different perspective and works in a different context. And together, we can bring this very hard but important conversation to light. So the problem is, though, when people use different terminology and imprecise language. One person wants a higher conversion ratio, while another person wants to respond faster to kernel panics. How can we reconcile these objectives? How do we quantify them so that we can make these competing objectives actionable and actually prioritize them? Well, SRE gives us the words that we need to define reliability and deliver on the user experience in precise terms so that we can be effective at having these conversations. The objective language helps us make smarter decisions about the very hard questions of how we use our time. In fact, for this particular very hard question, SRE gives us a very concise answer. Features or reliability? Yes. Because, and this is a key point of the field of SRE, reliability is a feature. Now, we don't typically discuss it that way. We usually talk about features meaning new things that a user can do. And reliability is just supposed to be there. It's not really a feature that we choose to add, and it's certainly not a feature we choose to leave out, but reliability takes work. And customers, they will choose reliable services over unreliable ones. Reliability is a differentiating factor between competitors. So SRE principle number 1 states that the most important feature of any system is its reliability. If your system isn't working, it doesn't matter what cool capabilities it was supposed to have. Now, customers won't often demand reliability up front. Why? Well, they assume the things you're building are going to work. But when reliability is missing, that's going straight to the top of their request list or their punch list. We need that reliability. So we need to prioritize reliability. And in order to prioritize it and improve it, we need to measure it. Well, of course, that's fine. We love to measure things. Here are some of the things that we like to measure in order to see how reliable our service is. CPU, ping response, disk caching. Have you ever said, I will only shop at a store that consistently keeps their CPUs at 92% or lower? No, of course you haven't. No one has ever said that because that's not how a user experiences a service. But have you ever been woken up in the middle of the night because Nagios was alerting on a CPU spike? Well, I'm old enough to have used Nagios in production, and I have. And pretty much every time, it's a false alarm. Yeah, sure, the CPU is high, but the application wasn't impacted at all. It wasn't affected. Maybe there's some garbage collection running. Maybe there's an automated backup. I don't care. I'm tired. I don't want to think about that right now. So what do? I start sending those CPU alerts straight to the trash. It's beautiful. They no longer wake me up. I can sleep through them comfortably. We really need is a better definition of reliability. And SRE teaches us that our monitoring doesn't decide our reliability, our users do. The purpose of our technology is to fulfill some need for some person somewhere. If our system doesn't fulfill that need, then it's not working. And we're not going to convince our customers that it is, even if your dashboards are as green as this slide. Your customers know whether or not that service is working. So in order to share our users' experience of reliability, we need to share a definition. And first, let's define user. How do our users perceive the reliability of our service? For that matter, how do our users define our application or service itself? What does it mean to them? What value do they get from it? For this, we use a tool called critical user journeys. A critical user journey, or CUJ, is the combination of a critical goal and the journey of tasks that a user undertakes to achieve that goal. As a user accomplishes each task, they get one step closer to achieving that goal. And frankly, we need to understand who are our users? Who's using our systems? What goals do they have? How do we know that they're progressing towards meeting those goals? So this is what a CUJ might look like. Let's say for a second that your company is in the insurance industry and it provides insurance to homeowners. So we might write a critical user journey like this. As a homeowner, I want to insure my home against damage. So I provide some information about my home and I see an instant quote on your website. And then once I see that quote, I might make a decision to chat with a representative online. Well, using these CUJs as a reference point, SRE describes a couple of S's: service level indicators, or SLIs, and service level objectives, or SLOs. These are the core of the vocabulary of the language of SRE. So given our user journey, remember that user journey around wanting an insurance quote, we might have SLIs, or service level indicators, around how quickly can I get an instant quote. I may have a different SLI about how quickly I can chat with an agent. And thinking about that from a customer perspective, I definitely have a higher tolerance for waiting a few minutes before chatting with someone. But an instant quote, that better come back pretty fast. At the same time, if that instant quote is fast, but grossly underestimates what my actual policy is going to cost me, I'm going to be rather unhappy. But not in that moment, later on during my experience. So the key with our SLIs is that they are metrics that describe the user's experiences. Once we have a good idea of what a user wants, we can start identifying how good the user needs those things to be. Instant quotes should display for the user within 2 seconds. The first chat response must be received within 60 seconds of initiating the chat tool during regular business hours, and so forth. Now, there's one other S word that you probably know of, and it's here on the slide: service level agreement, or SLA. To be quite frank, these typically fall outside of the day-to-day concerns of an SRE. And I like to avoid them whenever possible. Why? Well, oftentimes violating the terms of an SLA means we have to give our customers some sort of refund. And I definitely don't want to do that. SLAs also aren't always well aligned with user experiences or expectations either. Come with me on a quick thought experiment. It'll help demonstrate this. Have you ever been so unhappy with the level of service, so unhappy that you actually went to that drawer and pulled out the service level agreement to understand what terms was I promised? Is this service actually meeting those terms? And how often when you did that, were you then disappointed to find that the service levels you were receiving fell well inside the bounds of that SLA? So you're unhappy, the service isn't performing the way you like, and there's no remediation for you. The service is meeting its service level agreement. I've been in that situation too. So as SREs, let's stay away from SLAs. So our mission really is to set effective SLO targets, service level objective targets, and achieve them. So what are we shooting for? How reliable do you want this service to be? I mean, look, that is one of the easiest questions in the world to answer. 100%. I want this service to have all of the reliability all of the time. But let's be honest. 100% is the wrong reliability target for basically everything. I've borrowed this quote from Ben Traynor-Sloss, who was one of the early founders of the SRE practice within Google. So 100% is wrong. Why? Well, of course, one of the biggest reasons that 100% is the wrong reliability target, it can't be achieved. We can also use the time that we spend chasing 100%, we can use that time better. We can use that capacity that we have as humans, the capacity that we have in our systems. We can use that to deliver value instead. And one of the most important reasons that 100% is wrong, your users don't actually require it. They may tell you that they do with their mouth, with their words, with the emails that they send to you, but they don't actually require 100% reliability. So instead of asking, how reliable do you want the system to be? I prefer to ask this question: when do we need to make a service more reliable? More reliable. When do we need to make it more reliable? Well, and there's a good guide for that answer, because we need to make a service more reliable just before our users stop using it or otherwise become unhappy with the service. We want to keep our users happy, and we want them to continue using our service. So if we notice that they've stopped or changed their behavior in some other negative way, it's time, in fact, maybe it's past time to make the system more reliable. So we set our SLO targets at a level where we're keeping our customers happy, but not more than that. Look, we're engineers. One of the things that defines us is we get to be lazy. We want to do the right amount of work to make our systems work. We want to do the right amount of work to keep our customers happy, but we don't need to go beyond that. We certainly don't want to fall short of our targets because that will make our customers unhappy, but we don't want to overshoot them either, because then we're expending effort on reliability that our customers don't care about. They might not even notice that extra reliability. And what they'll be missing is functionality that we could have been building instead. So if we've agreed, and I hope by now I've convinced you, that targeting 100% reliability is not a good goal, then by definition, we are targeting more than 0% unreliability. We expect, in fact, we embrace a certain amount of failure because having some failures is consistent with prioritizing our customers' needs. We want to prioritize our customers' needs. Therefore, we embrace some level of failure. We call the space between our goal, whatever our service level objective is, and 100%, the space in between those two numbers, that is our error budget. The error budget is a set of expected errors, a budget that we can allocate. And just like a monetary budget, the amount of error budget we have available at any time has implications on what we can do. So to understand where to best spend your errors, how do you spend an error? Well, it helps to start by thinking about what things actually consume our error budget. What brings errors into the system? An analysis of our own outages revealed that roughly 70% of outages are triggered by changes to a running production system. So the biggest implication of having an error budget is that we only want to deploy or make changes to that running production system when we have enough error budget so that we can bear that risk. So we can use the error budget to do fine-grained prioritization. Do we have plenty of error budget? That's a signal from the system that we have risk that we can take on. It might be a signal from the system that we're moving too slow. We are being too risk averse. Let's take some of that away. Let's release new features. That's what we get when we have an error budget. But maybe this idea of releasing features or not releasing features, that's maybe a little bit too black and white. So there might be some other subtle things that we can do. We can spend our error budget on system changes that we need to make. Maybe you have a fleet of servers that need some patching. Well, let's use some of our error budget to recycle those servers, to patch them. We may have some risky experiments that we want to run. One of the riskiest experiments, look, when we set an SLI and understand what our service level objective should be, we're probably wrong. Every one of us, we're wrong about what that SLI should be, what that SLO should be. Take latency, for example. If we go back to that insurance quote, we said that the instant insurance quote should come back within 2 seconds. Well, what happens if it takes 2.5 seconds. Will our customers notice? Will they care? Maybe we could spend some of our error budget increasing some latency there and see how our customers respond. Let's actually understand what they need by looking at their behavior. Okay, so if we have plenty of error budget, we should spend it. But what happens when you overspend your budget? What are the consequences? If we're running low on error budget, or we've completely blown through all of our allocated budget, we need to be careful. If we're at risk of breaking our promises to our users, or maybe we've already broken them, that's when we need to pull back. And remember SRE principle number 1, reliability is the most important feature. Functionality, it's great, but delivering today's functionality is more important than adding tomorrow's functionality. So, and regardless of our practices, remember that incidents and outages, they will happen. So it's important to be prepared and beyond prepared, practiced for these. How are you and your team practicing incident response? Are you setting aside dedicated time, running drills where you can practice that incident response? The good news is you don't actually have to practice incident response because those incidents are coming for you. But the better news is you can practice incident response and you can have a little bit more control over the timing and the shape of those incidents. But regardless, we have to understand, how do we learn from those incidents? My friend John Allspaw has said that an incident is an unplanned investment. Think about that. An incident is an unplanned investment in our system. And we should do our best to make the most of that investment by increasing our return on that investment. What does it mean to reap the rewards of an investment? Well, in this case, a system outage or an incident, the way that we reap the rewards is we increase the learning that we get from that incident or from that outage. Accidents will happen. There will be times when we burn our error budget too fast, or maybe we set the threshold wrong in the first place. We're doing fine on all of our SLOs, but our users are unhappy. We need to understand that. So in our postmortems or retrospectives, after action reviews, whatever you call them, we need to make sure that we avoid assigning blame and instead work together to have a true objective examination of the context in which that outage occurred. Let's look at the information available to the people that were involved at that time. We take the view that every error is a systems error. Now, of course, when we use that word systems, we mean more than just the computer systems. We're in the system as well. So we want to focus our investigation on how did this situation come to be? And how can we avoid putting people in that same situation in the future? Well, this brings us back to the various responses that I discussed right at the beginning of today's presentation. How does your organization respond to failure? Well, remember, we're engineers. So it would be really great if we could measure this and identify some ways to improve. In fact, we have a tool that will help us assess and measure our organizational culture. How do we respond to failures? Take a look at some of these statements and just think for yourself here for a minute. Do you strongly disagree with these? Do you strongly agree with them? Where do you fit along that continuum? How would you describe your team? How would others on your team describe your organization? Continuing this thought experiment, how do the answers change as you work your way up the org chart towards the CEO? How do the answers change when there's an emergency relative to how does it work when everything is normal? Well, using the answers to these questions, we can start to chart our own organizations into the Westrom topology of organizational cultures. So Dr. Ron Westrom, he's a sociologist who has studied safety outcomes in healthcare, aviation, nuclear power, other safety critical industries. We can take a lot on the technology side from understanding his work and reading through his work. He's developed this topology to show the link between culture and safety outcomes. Well, we want those safety outcomes. Jamie mentioned earlier, psychological safety. This research maps directly to or confirms a lot of the research that Google has done into this idea of psychological safety. The teams that perform best are the teams with the highest psychological safety. So I ask you, what is the primary operating model for your organization? Is your team or your organization, are you power, rule, or performance oriented? Chances are you can identify your own organization as falling somewhere along this continuum. And the good news is, once you've identified where you are, you can now start to identify working on ways to improve too. So one final topic for us to cover with SRE is toil. Toil is the work that keeps us running in place, but it doesn't actually move us forward. Specifically, it's manual, repetitive, automatable work that's void of long-term value. A great example of this, and unfortunately, I've done this many times in my career, SSHing into a machine and restarting a service. In fact, I've had so many machines that I've had to SSH into a bunch of machines to restart a service. Look, that's boring. It's a rote and procedural task. Not only that, it's a bad use of my time. Oh, and I oftentimes forgot one of the 372 servers where that service needed to be restarted. I'm a human. I have a creative, flexible, spongy human brain. It could be doing something with much more strategic value than restarting services. On top of that, as I mentioned, we aren't really good at this. We're liable to forget things. We're liable to make mistakes while doing work that isn't rewarding. That's a lose-lose for everyone. Everyone loses in that scenario. So SREs work to identify and eliminate as much toil as possible. So to summarize, the SRE framework, the framework around SLOs and error budgets, this whole thing helps us align incentives and priorities across the entire product lifecycle. And SRE practices like the elimination of toil and learning from failure, these help us improve velocity, move faster while reducing risk. We want to move faster. We want to lower the risk in our organization. The truth is, one of the best ways to reduce risk is to move faster. Maybe not intuitive, but that is actually what we see happening in the real world. So as I get close to wrapping up here, I want to leave you with a quiz. Is SRE a way of doing things, or is SRE a person who does things? What do you think, Jamie? Oh, Jamie, I called you out.
I think it's a way of doing things. I think it's a way of doing things, a mindset, a process, and it could be that you are, as a person, an SRE. And so it's both the end state and a way of thinking and way of being.
Lovely. Jamie, high marks today.
Thank you. The reason I know is because I had to unmute myself.
Yes. If you're struggling, you're right. It's both. As a way of doing things, SRE impacts the entire organization. And in an organization that practices SRE, there are typically, though not always, oftentimes people who call themselves SRE, who have that as a job title. These people are experts in the practices, and their primary responsibility is to ensure that the services are reliable. But at the end of the day, whose job is it to make sure that our services are reliable? Well, unfortunately, that's all of our job. It doesn't matter where we sit. But what if we do have SREs, what exactly do they do all day? Well, a focus on site reliability needs to be incorporated throughout the entire software development lifecycle, from the idea all the way through to the running operations in production. And in order to make that truly happen, we like to have specialists, site reliability engineers. And as the software itself moves closer and closer to the customer, the SREs tend to move from a consultative role into a much more hands-on role. The SREs start defending that error budget. They speak for the user. They make sure that we're hitting those service level objectives that we've set. So implementing SRE in your org very well might follow a path like this. You start by giving the people responsible for running services some breathing room. Eliminate the toil. Silence those useless alerts that they're ignoring anyhow. But you know what? Ignoring work takes some mental overload, or it takes some mental operations from me. I have to put capacity, my mental capacity, my physical capacity towards ignoring those alerts. There's no good in that. Silence those alerts. Once you've given yourselves some breathing room, don't take on new work. Focus then on learning. Discover and monitor the things that are important to your customers and get a larger return on those unplanned investments, those incidents and outages. From there, you can start to set goals about the reliability targets and have discussions about what should you do when you miss those targets. Because the next step is to enforce those consequences. What are we going to do when we miss our targets? Or what are we going to do when we're greatly exceeding our targets? We need to change how work gets prioritized and let reliability play a factor in some of that prioritization of our work. Once you've done all that, you and your organization are on a path towards continuous learning and to continuous improvement. So it's time to reflect on what you've learned and repeat the process. Eliminate some more toil, silence some more alerts, update your SLIs and SLOs, go serve those customers, get to know your customers better and better every single day. So everyone has a role to play in site reliability engineering. And because everyone has a unique perspective on what customers want, what resources are available, and what the constraints are, SRE is a language. It's a language that helps bring those perspectives together to establish truly customer-centric, customer-first operations. So you might be asking yourself, well, I'm not an SRE. What is my role here? You might be a product owner, a developer, a manager. You all have a role to play in bringing better reliability principles, better reliability practices to your organization. And we start by building a shared language so that our conversations can be much more effective. So take a look at this list. Find yourself here. What is your role? What will you do next? How will you bring a focus on reliability to your organization? How will you bring a focus and an understanding of what your customers need into the conversation? So where do we go from here? Well, first, there are some books. Go read some books. Lots and lots of books are out there, some of which are published on our site and fully available online. So the first book, Site Reliability Engineering, was published back in 2014. It started the global conversation around SRE. And the most recent of these three books is about applying security principles in an SRE context. It came out just last year. These books are available, of course, in paperback, e-reader formats, anywhere you like, but you can also read them online for free. So there's nothing stopping you. We also have a great site full of resources for SREs. It's at sre.google. sre.google. You'll find a growing library of content, of resources, insights from experienced SRE practitioners. And also, the best way is we're friends. The best way to get engaged with SRE is just like any other language. Start talking. Everyone listening today, everyone on this What the Fucking Are, everyone watching the recording, we all have a part to play in implementing SRE. So find a friend and talk about it. Talk about what you want to achieve with SRE and how can you be part of it. Another good tip, if you have multiple people from your organization attending today's What the Fucking Are, have a conversation together as a group. But more importantly, go find the roles that didn't turn up for today's conversation and have this conversation with them. So I'd like to start talking as friends, with friends right now. What questions do you have? I actually posed this question on Twitter, and I will take a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, Jamie, to answer some of the questions that I got from Twitter. So first, a question I got from a friend of mine, Camille, is it worth creating error budgets when you don't have SLAs or SLOs? I find this to be a really interesting question. And here's kind of how I think about this. Your organization today has SLIs, has SLOs, and has an error budget. You might not have the language, or you might not use that language to describe what you do. But let's unpack them for a second. An SLI, a service level indicator. How does a user know if your service is working? It doesn't matter what you call it. Your users know. Your customers know whether or not the service is working. A service level objective, that's a goal that we set. How good do we need it to be? Again, this is something that our customers tell us every day. We know how our customers, well, we might not know, but our customers certainly know how they feel about the reliability of our services. Do we have insights into that? And then the error budget is the consequences that happen when we miss or when we exceed those reliability requirements. So when your organization does miss its service level objectives, how does it respond? It might organizationally change and focus on reliability for a sprint or an iteration. So my point is, you already have these things today. Your organization does change its behavior based on the reliability experiences that your customers have. Put a language around them, start introducing these topics and terms, and start having an explicit conversation instead of implicit reactions to what's happening around you. Next, JJ asks, okay, Nathen, let's say that tomorrow you've suddenly become the co-founder of a startup. Oh, congratulations to me. I'm off on a good journey here. So at what stage do you introduce SRE? And what do you tell folks that don't believe reliability is important this early on? All right, so let's see. Maybe I'll take the second one first. What do you tell folks that don't believe reliability is important this early on? Well, I think that reliability itself is a nuanced question. It's more than just availability. Is the service up or is it down? What is the service doing? Is the user helping? Is the service helping the user along that critical user journey? If so, we have some reliability in our system. And if not, we maybe need to look at that reliability. The truth is that reliability oftentimes falls into those NFRs. You know NFRs, right? Non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements, I think that's bullshit. Non-functional requirements are things like reliability, scalability, security. You know what? If your system doesn't have those things, it's probably not functional. I much prefer the term operational requirements. That said, if I'm a brand new startup, the people that are using my service have much different reliability expectations than a service that's been around for a decade. So my users might be more understanding of incidents, of outages, of lower reliability. So the most important thing I can do is understand, what do my users need? If you think about the early days of Twitter, remember we used to see the fail whale all the time? Twitter would fall over a lot. Well, in those early days, the thing that mattered most to Twitter as a business was signing up new users. So you could sign up, maybe had a different reliability requirement than reading other people's tweets. So as you start thinking about this in your startup, think about understanding your users. It's never too early for that, and introducing the right reliability practices to them. All right, I have two more questions from Twitter, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, Jamie, see what questions we have here today. The first one, who can wait on this talk until September? All right, look, can't we all just agree on one way to write our dates, whether it's in Europe or in the US? Let's agree to a standard. I know there must be a standards body that tells us how to write our dates. And then, so that's obviously just a fun little question. But at the end of the day, like, it is important how we measure time. And in distributed systems, we need to make sure that our clocks are synchronized. So I hope that Mike turned up today. Perhaps he put a reminder on his calendar for September. We'll have to see. And then a personal question, am I still really using Untapped, or is that now a bot that keeps adding random beers to my feed? I am, in fact, currently using Untapped. And let's see, I wanted to tell you, I meant to look this up in advance. I've checked into 909 unique beers over my lifetime of using Untapped. So if you're on Untapped, you can follow me there as well. Again, just make sure you misspell my name. All right, with that, I want to say thank you so much. I want to hand it back to you, Jamie, and team, because I would imagine that there might be some questions there in the chat. I'm also just going to stop sharing my screen.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, let's see if Nathen, please, a big round of applause. Everybody, please. There's 250 people here. Very good. Now, Nathen mentioned blameless postmortems, what we call blameless inquiries. Now, there is another book, Nathen, to add to the books that you shared. This is Cloud Native Transformation Patterns, written by Pinny Resnick, Michelle Guinau, and me. Oh, I wrote this book. Anyway, so blameless inquiry appears in the book, right? What are the patterns that we can use to succeed with SRE? You don't need to buy the book. You can more or less download it somewhere on our site. And all of these cards help you to think about how you start to become cloud native. So that was just a link from your slides, Nathen, to blameless inquiry. Now, we've got a few questions coming in, but this first one's a doozy. If you're a pathological organization, so basically a bit like the mafia, there's lots of bullying, lots of toxicity, lots of swearing. Can you do SRE? Is it possible?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Can you do SRE in a very pathological organization? Well, I'll tell you what, a pathological organization, they're pretty easy to spot. And really, if you look at the leaders within your organization, those leaders are really focused on building themselves up. How many people do I have reporting to me? How much control do I have? How much data do I have about how this organization works? I'm going to protect that. So can you go from that to SRE practices? I think it is very difficult because within that organization, within that leaders portion of the organization, yes, we might be talking with one another, but we're certainly not going to share information in other parts of the group. And so this becomes a real challenge. One of the things that we, in that organization, maybe you have a product owner who works in a very pathological way, and you have a service owner who works in a very pathological way, both kind of hoarding the data. You're going to see a lot of the like, no, it's your fault. It's your fault. And an SRE in that case is going to be like, well, CPU less than 92% utilized. So we're good. Let's look at my metrics. I think it is really important that you move to a place where you have a common and shared understanding of who your customers are and what they need from the services that you're providing, as well as starting to align some of those incentives. So I think in a pathological organization, can you get better reliability from your services? Yes. Can you practice the principles and practices of SRE? There, you're going to have a lot more challenge.
I think our perspective, Nathen, would be this, that there is no cloud native or SRE without risk and experimentation. And wherever
Absolutely.
there's blame, you can wave goodbye to experimentation.
No doubt.
Yeah. And I think so the short answer to me would be no. Or as you said, you could have the technical aspects of it, but you wouldn't get the whole shebang.
Absolutely. The other thing that's nice about the assessing blame is if you work in a pathological organization and take on some risk, which you should do, you're likely to get fired. So it's cool. You'll have a new job that will be less pathological where you're working.
Absolutely. You will quickly get fired in a pathological, speaking your mind and running experiments, you won't last very long. Okay, let me try to pull out a few more questions. Okay, this is probably about career development, and I'm sure there's a lot of people interested in this on the call. How much development experience do you think an SRE should have, and are there any languages you might suggest?
Oh yeah, this is a great question. So, how much development experience does an SRE need to have? The short answer is more. I think it doesn't matter where you start from. I think that over time, we are all moving much more towards adopting software engineering practices. And it's more than just about which language you use. The language that you use, well, I mean, obviously there are lots of different languages that you might use. We talked about Rust earlier today. Python might come in, Ruby might come in. The language, I think, is less important than understanding the true engineering practices. Look, I used to be a system administrator. And the way that I sysadmined my systems, first, I was a very nervous system administrator. I was scared. And so every time when I was on the command line about to execute a command, right before I hit the magic button, do you know the magic button, Jamie?
I do not know the magic button.
Oh, it's sometimes called return or enter on your keyboard, right? So you type in a command and then you press the magic button. That's when the magic happens, when you actually execute that command. So before I would hit the magic button, I would take the command that I'd just written and I would copy and paste it into a wiki. That way I would know that no matter what happened, I could always recreate my infrastructure, reconfigure my systems. Well, the truth is that wiki was, well, I like to call it the obituary for what my infrastructure used to look like. It was never accurate. It was never up to date. And even following the own commands that I had copied and pasted with such discipline never led to the same system. So we really need to start thinking and behaving and putting into practice many more software engineering capabilities. Things like, I don't know, taking your code and storing it into a version control system. And I mean a proper version control system, not that BAK version control system, you know, where you copy a file to file name.back. That's not a version control system. We have to look at things like, in my day, it was CVS and then Subversion and now Git, but look at distributed version control system. Start thinking about test-driven development. How do you write unit tests for the code that you're creating? And so I really think it becomes as much about understanding the practices and the discipline of software engineering and applying those practices to the practice of systems administration. And here's a good tip. There are people within your organization who are well versed in software engineering. Go sit with them. Go talk with them. Go share what you're trying to do. They may not know how to engineer a system, but they know how to engineer software. The two of you can learn from each other. And even if you're working in a pathological organization, I mean, you might have to hang out in the lunchroom and like not let the leaders see you talking to one another. But by talking to one another, you start to build that connection and you're well on your way towards SRE.
Absolutely fantastic advice there. And of course, you've got to take responsibility for your own career, and learning for learning's sake, you know, not a bad thing either.
Absolutely.
Now, this is that moment where we take a big risk in the webinars. Does anybody feel brave and would like to unmute themselves and ask Nathen a question directly?
Yeah, I'm going to go for it, Jamie.
Oh, good lad. Hello, Anthony. Welcome.
Hi, Nathen. Quick one here for you. So if an SRE needs to engage across the full SDLC, do you see that SRE needs a like one-to-one mapping with a product team? So they almost work embedded with that product team? And if so, do they go on call for it, or is it like a consultative approach? How does it kind of work?
Yeah, this is a great question. And we see it working in a number of different ways across organizations. So within Google itself, so we'll start with the giant organization of Google, right? We have a team that are our software engineers, a team that are our product developers or product managers, sorry. And we have a separate team that is SRE. Now, SRE will come in as a consultative approach to those product teams. They may, in fact, embed with those product teams for a certain amount of time. They may look at those product teams and say, listen, you're about to go live into production. Let's have a quick assessment. Let's do a product readiness check. Make sure that you're building a system that's reliable. And then once you've proven that the system you've built is reliable, hand us the pager. We'll take that. We'll take that on-call rotation. We'll own that. However, if your system is consistently missing its service level objectives, if it's alerting too frequently, guess what we'll do? We'll hand the pager back to you. So as SREs, we can also disengage. So that's one model of working. Another model, of course, is that the SRE is fully deployed or embedded within that product team. So they turn up at the stand-ups every day, and they understand what's in the backlog, what's currently being worked, what's about to be deployed tomorrow. This may be something that is a long-term embedding, or it may be something that just while this service is missing its service level objectives, while it's under its error budget, we're going to have an SRE here. In fact, I've seen teams do this where, when they miss their error budget, one of the consequences is an SRE turns up for their daily stand-ups. And in this particular scenario, maybe this engineering team is building a new feature that's going to go out to some third party, maybe for payment processing. The SRE in that stand-up will just ask questions. Well, what happens when that third-party processor is offline? What does your retry logic look like? And just by asking those questions and helping those engineers really think about building reliable operations or reliable services, they start to change how those developers are thinking about things. And once they've come back within their error budget, that SRE can sort of stop turning up for those daily stand-ups, but the software engineers continue asking themselves those same questions. So I really look at that role of SRE early on in that product development lifecycle. We're a coach. We come in and help coach those software engineers in much the same way that a security professional might or a QA professional might. Let's coach those software engineers and help them understand, what does it mean to build a truly reliable system? So the short answer is we see all different sorts of organizational structures. And the organizational structure, I think, is one that as an organization, you should probably experiment with and learn, take some lessons from. And remember that even if you do not have a person whose title is SRE, you are still responsible for reliability. And at the same time, you can't take a sysadmin, not change their job, what the work that they do, and just call them an SRE. Well, actually, you're welcome to do so as long as you give them a 20% pay rise or better. And then I don't care what you call them, and they won't care either.
That's cool. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Are there any more brave souls out there who want to grab the mic and ask Nathen a question directly?
I would like to go forward.
Oh, very good. Hello, Dimple. Welcome to the webinar. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm DevOps fellow at Inside Data Science, and I really like this presentation. I would like to ask, I'm learning DevOps tool, but I'm a beginner. So what would you suggest how to go for SRE, and what are the best practices to be performed while learning?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, when you think about DevOps, I think a lot of the focus on DevOps it tends to be around the pipeline. How do we get changes from the developer's workstation through to production? And when it comes to leaning into SRE, if you will, I think it really becomes a question of how is this system performing in production? So some of the tools that you might really want to look into are tools that provide that monitoring and that observability. But really the most important tool that we have as an SRE, I think there are three. Most of us have three. One mouth and two ears. Let's go talk with other parts of the organization, because we really, in order to understand how our systems are performing, we need to understand what our customers want from them. And in order to understand that, we probably don't have direct access to our customers, but we do have access to our product managers or our product owners or the business. So we can go talk to those folks and really understand, what do our users need out of this? And then you can ask the question, do we have, for example, the monitoring that will tell us, are the users experiencing what they expect? And then more, at least as importantly, how do we tie those user expectations to our business goals? And can I look at those two together and understand how do they interact with one another? I'm missing my user expectations, but I'm meeting my business goals. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong user expectations, right? And so just really starting to understand a little bit more there. And so I do think when it comes to tooling, the first place that most SREs will start is really digging into the monitoring, and further than that, the observability of the platforms that they're running.
All right, thank you.
You bet, Dimple. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
we've still got a hell of a lot of participants online. Most people drop off when they do drop off because they've got another meeting. So don't feel bad. But the fact that we've still over 200 people in the Q&A is a very good sign, which makes me think at least 0.5% of you want to ask a question.
Okay, Brett.
Hello, Dan. Welcome.
Hi, Nathan. Thanks for the talk. I've actually got 2 questions, if I may. So earlier in your talk, you mentioned critical customer journeys. How many critical customer journeys do you typically map out, like in an organization, as sort of an example? And secondly, kind of when starting out with SLOs, do you think it's more beneficial to go after kind of critical SLOs within the organization that might be harder to implement due to kind of legacy tech and monitoring? Or do you think it's easier to go over sort of more greenfield development, which might be less critical, but easier to implement?
Yeah, sure. These are great questions. Thanks for those, Dan. So first, when it comes to the wow, I seem to have forgotten immediately your first question. The second question, so let me start with the second question. I'll see if the first one comes back to me, and if not, I'll come back to you. So where do you start? Do you start with something that is, critical to the business, but maybe hard to get implemented? I think the best advice I can give you is start simple. And it doesn't matter if it's new tech or existing tech, you have to start simple, because the one thing that I can guarantee you, when you discover your first set of SLIs, when you set your first set of SLOs, you're wrong. And I'm sorry, it's not because I don't believe in you, Dan, because trust me, I believe in you. I believe that you remember what the first question was, which I also do remember now. So I'll get to that. But you're just learning. You're just starting to put this practice into place. And it can be, look, we're engineers also. The thing we love is to cover every single edge case, every single possibility with the engineering, with the tooling that we build up. And frankly, because we're wrong in understanding what our customers are, it's a waste of our time and energy to do that. So the right first thing to do is to pick a service where you understand what do the users need and what will it take us to get to a place from where we are today to where we can truly monitor and measure what that user requires, and then make prioritization decisions based on our ability to achieve that. And then your first question, to prove that I remember it, was how many critical user journeys should you have across the organization? I'm going to flip the answer around a little bit and say that when you look at your critical user journeys, we typically recommend 3 to 5 service level indicators per each critical user journey, right? So as an example, you may have an e-commerce site. Well, what are the critical user journeys? A critical user journey, I want to buy something from your site. Well, how do you get to buying something? Well, first you have to search for something. You have to be able to put it into your cart. You have to be able to check out. Maybe you need to create an account. Those might be, together, it might be one critical user journey. How do I actually purchase something? But maybe I have an SLI around the search capability or the browsing of the catalog, an SLI around how long does it take to put something into the cart, and then a third or fourth SLI into how long does it take for me to check out. And within each of those little steps in the journey, you might ask questions like, is it available? Can I actually put something into the cart? How fast is it? Is it accurate? Do you show me things that you're completely out of inventory on and allow me to put those into my cart? That's going to lead to a pretty negative customer experience. So across your organization, how many CUJs do you have? Well, it really depends. How many services are you providing to your customers, and how do you start to break those down? But in either case, start simple. Do not come out of the gate tomorrow or next week. We're an SRE organization. We have 278 different SLOs that we're trying to meet. And we have to do a bunch of weird math to figure out, well, we kind of met this one, but not that one. Do we have to take on the consequences of the error budget? Stop, stop, stop. Keep it simple. And remember that it's about prioritizing that user experience. Thanks, Dan.
Good questions, Dan. You snuck 2 in. I asked him 1, but we got 2. So the next time you come with a question, you start at 0. So you're not allowed,
there you go.
You're not allowed to ask.
Sorry.
So if you come next time with 3 questions, you can ask 2. All right. Any more for any more?
I have one question, Jamie.
Hello, Daniel. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really insightful. A question might be related to the previous one, but the thing is, how would you define the reliability of your service if you are providing a platform for a lot of different product teams, which, let's say, they need their own reliability? Because let's say that our worst case, it will be the minimum for them, and they will need to go even below.
Right. Yes, this is a great question. So I'm working in an organization where we have a foundational service, and on top of that service, there's another service that's built, and on top of that service, there's another service and another service, and all the way out until we eventually hit a customer. Well, I'm responsible for this very fundamental service, if you will, and this fundamental service serves a bunch of different applications. Not surprisingly, this is a scenario that we find ourselves in within Google. Right? There are many foundational services that we have. So there are a couple of things there. First, it's really about understanding who's the user or the customer of my service. So the customer of your foundational service, what level of support are you providing to them? What service level objectives are they hoping for? The other thing that's really nice when you are responsible for a platform team, you can publish and talk about your service level objectives in a way that's different than you might talk about your service level objectives with your customers. With your end customers, you likely have an SLA in place, one of those contractual obligations. But internally, we can talk very openly, and maybe we should do this externally as well, about what service level objectives we're actually setting for the service that we're running, so that the people building on top of our service can have an understanding of the goals that we're setting. And frankly, they shouldn't be the ones that are pushing us to increase that and inch ever closer to 100%. We should have an open and honest conversation. And this also goes back to that Western culture where if we want to be performance oriented, we can't make decisions in a vacuum at each one of those layers. We have to look at the entire user experience across those and have communication and talk about how do we prioritize our resources? How do we prioritize our capacity? At the end of the day, though, within Google, we have foundational services that publish a service level objective so that when you design a system on top of that, you can understand the level of reliability that you should expect from that service and design your system with that in mind. So it is sort of this layered approach. When we look at an overall customer experience, we want to ask a question about our SLIs. Do we know that when it fails for the customer, we're going to catch that? And then the other question we might ask is, are we hitting all of the failure domains from the customer all the way through to that foundational service? Let's make sure that we're measuring each one of the steps along that, or each one of the tiers along that path. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question before we start to wrap up. Anybody else? Any final questions for Nathen?
Yeah, hi, Bala here. Hi, Nathen. Wonderful presentation. Hi,
thank you.
Jamie. Thank you. Yeah, just one question about, is an SRE to be a subject matter expert? You should know everything about the products, because there could be multiple products, like Google has many products. So does he has to be a subject matter expert? And how much coding experience a person should have?
Yeah, this is a great question, Bala. I think that an SRE has to be invest in their expertise in the particular service that they are working on. And so the more you understand about that application, obviously, the better off you're going to be. But SRE typically comes out of or starts with a system engineering background. So really understanding the platform on which this application runs is extremely important. We need to understand the underlying operating system. How does the network work? All of these things are super important. And then eventually get into that application. And I think in terms of software engineering, I think that more and more, what we're asking our SREs to do and really embracing this idea of site reliability engineering is about eliminating toil. And the way that you eliminate that toil, that manual, repetitive work, oftentimes is by automating it. And so you do need to understand, how do I write code that is reliable, that will allow me to automate away some of the work that I'm doing. And then when you get all the way up to the application tier, the applications that your customers are interacting with, as an SRE, you might want to inject some telemetry into that application to feed your monitoring systems. So either working together with those application engineers, or in the best case, you have direct access to that version control system and you can make changes to that application, whether those are changes you make directly or changes that you recommend via something like a pull request that an application engineer then looks at. So in short, I think that yes, you have to be a subject matter expert in the services that you're running. And we also have to recognize that just like 100% is the wrong reliability target for just about anything, knowing 100% about a service is a fool's errand. Like, you're not going to get there. So my advice is get smarter every day, learn something new every day, just practice this idea of continuous improvement, continuous learning, and then start increasing your skills and your depth and your comfort with software engineering practices. Thanks for the question, Bala.
Thank you very much. What a very nice way to end this now. So this is the end of the webinar. And what you'll find is that these things are very hard to bring to an end, because in a real conference, you shake hands and you have a drink and then you filter out. But I am not going to fuck it up this week, I promise. So from the top, in the chat box is a feedback form. Let us know what you think. We really want to make these sessions entertaining, engaging, fun, useful. Let us know what we got right, but more importantly, let us know what we got wrong. Now, there's lots of stuff you can find on our website. We are very dedicated to educating the people we work with and being deeply embedded in the community. The business elements, that comes at a different time. That's not what this is about. Grab any links, ask us questions directly. Nathen will also take questions on Twitter, right, Nathen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Follow me on Twitter. My DMs are open. Grab me on LinkedIn, anywhere you like.
LinkedIn, the beer application, or Twitter. So on that note, let me please thank, from the Container Solutions side, the two main people, Teresa and Carla. Big round of applause for them.
Thank you.
A big round of applause for me, your host for the day. Bravo, bravo. And of course, the biggest round of applause for Nathen, our wonderful guest. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. This is the end. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.